All right, guys, here's the last video for this material. So I'm going to cover the last three principles. Obviously, we've done the definitions for each, and hopefully you're catching on to what we're doing here. So this will be the last video before we'll eventually be assessing and testing on this here shortly, okay? And then the assignment is attached in the classroom that goes with this video. So with the 5 principles of government, the 3 we're going to talk about today is federalism, separation of powers, and checks and balances. So let's get to it. All right. So one of the things of not only just today's expectation, but what I want you to be able to do with these 5 principles, because the thought of this, it just seems archaic, like it's from the 1800s. But how do we actually tie this into 21st century events, 21st century, modern day, our day to day? How do we see these things around us? And it's one of the things to start to think about. So like popular sovereignty, that idea, okay, a term that's probably been introduced to you for the first time. But what does that look like today? All right. And it goes back to us electing people, voting, and us having representatives, like in the assignment, that republic style of government, where we have representatives that represent us in Congress and in other areas of government. Okay, so we'll try to think of the same way here today with these last 3. So let's look at federalism. Federalism is the division of power between national and state governments. And one of the things that I've used in years past, which has always helped people remember this, and I'll continue to kind of drive this idea home, is you can think of it, federalism, as a layered cake. Okay, so in that layered cake, you have federal government, you have state government, and you have local government, and they're all intertwined, okay? But yet they're still separate, like a layered cake. It's one cake at the end of the day, and that cake is government. And oftentimes you're going to taste that cake and taste all 3 flavors, okay? The same way with government. All 3 layers, okay, are going to sometimes work together, work separately, and you as a citizen will get a taste of all 3. Why the founders thought this was necessary: by dividing the power of the central government, they didn't want it to become too powerful. So they were worried of the federal government being too powerful. Okay, and like I said, this is still a debate today. Like, are they too powerful? Okay, and one of the things as you go about your day to day and as you grow older and you'll see some things, there's a lot of stuff locally that become issues for you, or statewide, because you're abiding by a lot of state laws. When you break the law, oftentimes you're taken to court based off of state law. There's not as many times are you getting in trouble for a federal crime. But anyway, well, hopefully we wouldn't have to deal with that anyway. But the idea of that's oftentimes what we're abiding by, more oftentimes than not, are state laws. So history of, okay, so this isn't so much even a history of as just explain the difference between the 2. There are 3 types of powers that we'll discuss: delegated powers, reserved powers, and concurrent powers. Delegated powers are those which the Constitution gives only to the national government. They're delegated to the national government. The reserved powers, okay, are state powers. They're reserved for the states. I always tell people to remember this as, think of them as like the varsity, right? So high school sports. Varsity, okay, is like federal government. It's the top dog right there. The reserves, or the JV, okay, the reserves, those are your state laws. And those are ones, not powers, not laws, sorry. But those are the powers that are reserved strictly to the states. And then concurrent are ones, if you concur with somebody, like somebody says, I believe Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time. And so I would say, I concur. I agree, okay? I share that idea with you. So concurrent powers, to remember that, are powers that are shared by both the state government and the national government. So what does that look like in today's world? Delegated, all right? So powers which the Constitution gives only to the national government. The war on terror. This is done at the federal level, okay? Any war we fought in, it was always done at the federal level. Reserved, state power, the Ohio driver's license, okay? Or as my boy McLovin up there with the Hawaii driver's license, all right? And then concurrent, you're going to pay both federal and state taxes, so taxation. Um, an example of one of these powers, this is an actual law. This is one of those, I think some of you guys did this with Mr. Penrose at one point in time, of weird state laws or local laws. But in Kansas, you are prohibited from shooting rabbits from a motorboat. Um, I don't know how you come to this law. It's a matter of somebody, I guess, actually doing this at some point in time where they decided to create this law. Um, so no shooting rabbits from a motorboat. Like in Ohio, you're probably allowed to shoot rabbits from a motorboat in the right area. I don't know who's doing this anyway, but the idea is when we talk about reserve powers, we're going to say that they're able to make their own laws based off the state, and this doesn't infringe upon any federal law, so it's able to stay. Um, Here's a little chart, something to look at of what is delegated, what is reserved, and what are some of those concurrent. There's other ones beyond this, but these are some of the regular ones, or I should say more common ones. So if we go to delegated, we already talked about war, negotiating treaties, issuing money or printing of money, and then regulating trade. We go to reserved, regulating education, that's done at the state level. Okay. Granting licenses, we just already talked about that. Providing police protection, that's done at the state and local level. Regulating the sale of property within state. All right. And then concurrent, we just mentioned, they both levy taxes. All right. Defining crimes and punishment, talked about that a little bit. Determining voting qualifications. Okay. That's done at both it's somewhat concurrent. It's more reserved, but there is a federal touch to this. And when we get there, when we talk about voting, I'll talk about that. The actual running of elections is done at the state level, but voting qualifications kind of happen in both. And then borrowing money, okay? Both federal and state can borrow money. All right, we're going to move on to the next one. There's a video that will be posted in the classroom. We're not going to obviously watch this here, okay? But it will be available to you in the classroom, okay? Next one we want to talk about is separation of powers. And we know this requires a distribution of power among independent branches. So we're basically talking about, with this one, they decided to distribute power amongst three branches in our government. That is the legislative, executive, and judicial. Why do they think this is necessary? They did not want one branch to become too powerful, all right, or to become stronger than the other. So, like, if they saw a growing power amongst the executive or led by the president, this would be something that the founders would say, hey, the whole idea of this, if they would have seen one branch becoming the most powerful, if they had a choice, it'd probably actually be the legislative, not the executive, because of their fear of this one individual or the executive department, one department becoming too powerful, seeming similar to a monarchy. Okay. But that is what separation of powers are. What does this look like? Okay. It's obvious each branch can do different things. And so legislative makes laws, executive carries out or enforces the law, and the judicial applies or interprets these laws. So today, all right, legislatively, all right, or sorry, the legislative branch, let's say that, they can pass a bill to give Olympians a tax break on their winnings. This was actually something years ago that was put up there. That's why I have this on there. And that's something they do. They make laws. Okay. Executive. When Obama was president, he created the largest Marine reserve by what is called executive authority. Okay. Only the president has executive authority. All right. This could be something, creating a large reserve. That's not saying that legislatively this might not be able to be done, okay, through that process. But there are some things which are known as executive authority, or sometimes presidents will issue executive orders, which we'll talk about later on down the road. And sometimes people have issues with executive orders, all right, or even executive authority. And like I said, we'll discuss this. Judicial interpretation of a case made all states recognize same-sex marriage. I brought this up in an earlier video. Okay, the interpretation of a case made by the judicial branch is what made all states recognize same-sex marriage. Which there were some at the time. There were some states that already did, but not all states did. They interpreted a case that made sure that all states recognize same-sex marriage. All right. We're going to skip this, obviously. Last one here, checks and balances. What is it? So all three branches have their own powers. What checks and balances do, because their fear of one branch becoming too powerful, all right, is it allows branches to stop or check the other branches from doing certain things. Think of it as the idea of if someone puts you in check, they kind of make you step back a little bit, okay? Same thing here. This is having one branch making this branch step back a little bit with the power that they are using. So why do they think this is necessary? Like I said, once again, they did not want one branch to become too powerful. So what does this actually look like? Okay, so let's talk about like the presidential veto. All right. There have been 2,580 presidential vetoes in American history. That's as of January 6th of 2020. All right. 7 presidents have never vetoed a bill. FDR vetoed 635. And then more presently, Obama 12, Trump 6. All right. So about, I guess, 6 a year for both of them. What else do we see with checks and balances? All right. Impeachment is a check on. So Bill Clinton was impeached. He wasn't removed from office. He was impeached, which means charges were brought on. Okay. Trump, right? So went through the impeachment process. So what this is the legislative branch checking the executive branch. All right. What other kind of checks and balances do we see? Because it's going to be one branch checking another. Obama nominated 3 justices. Congress approved, okay, because they have to go through a process, and we'll discuss that process. But Congress approved 2. The last justice that he nominated never came to a vote, all right? And that was a big political ordeal, all right? One side said they should have voted. One side obviously said that they shouldn't have, okay? So that also is a form of a check. Hopefully this makes sense. So to break this down, checks and balances, okay? So they all 3 of them have powers. So checks and balances is there so that those powers essentially don't get abused. So the judicial can check both the executive and the legislative. The legislative can check both the executive and the judicial. And then obviously the last for the third. They both have the power to check the other 2. And the section on your worksheet that you have to fill out for the assignment for this section, that's what you're going to be looking at. What are some of these checks? And you'll kind of realize what this actually looks like. Okay, so this is it. I said this would be a little bit quicker. I just wanted to go through, kind of explain these a little bit to you. Remember, you can always contact me if you have questions. All right.